to work.
I retired about a year and a half ago, and I don't know what I do, but I'm busy. It's something every day. So,
Yeah, just, I've got 2 properties, so they keep me busy. Be the first time that I'm unemployed in more than 50 years.
a couple more minutes. The school and Bill is supposed to show up. Give you a short meeting.
Gary says he'll answer all the school stuff.
Don't cough
It's
anymore.
loud enough now.
Sue said she was gonna be here. I never heard officially from Janet. She doesn't seem to know.
If he turns off his microphone, we won't hear that. We can just turn it on when he...
Okay. Ward,
Here.
Brian Hickey. Gary Swanson. Here. Mike LaBranch.
Here.
Joe Lamartina here. Ned Carpenter. Here. Roger Caddy. Here. Okay. Chris Wolf. Here. Chris Wolf. Rich Lesavoy. Here. And Eric is remote. Okay, so based on the rules, we vote to allow Eric to be remote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Nobody opposed. Okay, so Eric, you can officially vote tonight.
Thank you. I'm here alone.
Okay, so now that we've done the roll call, let's do a pledge of allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. At 7:02, there's time for public comment. Anybody from the public like to speak? Seeing no members of the public here, we'll close public comment at 7:02. Okay. We would do the town first, but Bill, do you mind if we do the school first? They've got a kind of a busy schedule tomorrow, sure? Okay. Gianna, whatever, would you guys like to explain the documents that you sent to us? And I think there's a couple of questions that we're gonna hit you with once you get going.
Answer better than Jan, I will.
Okay.
She's very
So-
capable, so we'll let her take
So
Do it.
thank you for having us here tonight. As you sales, we've submitted our quarter four financial report. They've first and then came along to you. Just kind of a high level summary, the information in two different ways. The first is kind of in the categories that people really generally think about, salaries, benefits, operations, and then there's a second presentation of the expenditures that's in, and the reason I include that is because that's the way we report that information to the state when we do our tax rate setting. So if anyone's trying to crosswalk our financials, it's easier to look by the function code to find that. And you'll notice at the bottom of both of those summaries, the dollar amount's exactly the same. It's just another way of looking at the same expenditures. So I've highlighted for you in here a few notable parts relative to expenditures. Would you like me to kind of just go through the bullet points of what those variances are, or did you have questions, specifically on the report? How would you like me to go forward?
Anybody have any specific questions? Anybody have any specific questions?
I do, but I'll wait until a little later.
Expenditures?
Roger has questions, obviously. No? My questions have, trying to understand,
Why don't we walk
Yeah.
through it, just for the viewing
Yeah.
audience?
Yeah. So, as I said, the first part of the report deals with the expenditures. That's the appropriated monies that we have that we work within every year. There is, because of COVID, we've been impacted quite significantly with the expenditures. We have expenditures that we planned on that we weren't able to expend. So what I tried to do is we tried to break it down for you so you can kind of understand where those monies were left in our budget and the reasons why we weren't able to expend them. So basically, salaries, over $500,000 were left. Sadly, those things are the result of programming a lot of times that we couldn't run for our kids. Athletics, co-curriculars, assistants, student assistants, people we couldn't hire. We also experienced some staffing challenges relative to filling positions. I'm sure if you've watched the news, you've seen we're not alone. So of the amount we had left, over 500,000 was in salaries alone. Another 475 were in benefits costs. Those two go right together. So if you don't hire a position, you don't pay the benefits on them. So between those things, we had almost $1 million just in those two areas. We had some operations expenditures. Professional development, we often get in speakers and we do different activities that we get in. We couldn't do any of those things for our teachers with COVID. And in addition to that, we had one special education student that had been budgeted for out-of-district tuition who left the district at the beginning of last year, so that was a significant savings in our special education services. A year ago, well, more than a year ago now, when we have expenditures that are open at the end of the fiscal year, and they're not going to be closed out, and usually project-based things that continue into the summer because that's our go time. We present to the board and we ask to encumber those funds into the next year. So they had encumbered a certain amount of money for us, $368,000 from fiscal year 20 to bring into this year. If we don't expend those monies in the way that they are, that they voted for them or the way we asked, we are required by law to return any amounts to the district. We can't repurpose them for another purpose. So there were a few projects that came in a little bit lower than we had anticipated, but our largest component of that balance, we returned $162,000 of that amount. The largest amount came from the hard work of our student services director, who worked with Medicaid. We'd been subject to an audit. They'd estimated owe almost $100,000 in fines. She was able to prove their mistake, not ours. and was able to negotiate that down, recover almost $90,000 of that. So that's a huge boon to the district due to her hard work. And actually, that's a good thing for us to leave that on the table, so we don't have to pay it out. And the final big component, another $361,000, has to do with, many of you remember, the voters in town voted for $415,000, 531. I said that wrong, 415,531 of bond interest to be used to enhance our building projects. There were certain projects that weren't part of the initial larger project, but we were going to pursue them. As we started through the year, we were able to find that some of those amounts we were able to get done for less money than we'd estimated. And I cited one example. We had expected an electrical project to take $28,000. We were able to manage it and bring it in, and wound up completing it for just over $6,000. So as with the other tranche of money, if we don't expend it for the purposes that we asked, it has to come back. And one of the large pieces the school board was made aware of, we were supposed to buy furniture out of this money. That was part of the original intent. But as to distance students, we had to actually remove our existing furniture, a lot of it, from our classrooms. Our 2 cafeterias were chock full of furniture we couldn't keep in our schools. So therefore, our teachers really didn't have a chance to determine what furniture they needed. They couldn't set up their classrooms normally. Our building project at the high school was done, and then almost immediately we went out for COVID. So they never really had even a chance to use their space. So we had asked that a warrant article be put on last year to allow us to put the money that we had intended to spend on furniture into a capital reserve. That's the only way we're able to carry it to the next year. That was approved by the voters, and $60,000 was put into a new capital reserve that will allow us to purchase some furniture when and if we can get our classrooms set up the way we need to. We're still not quite there yet, still distancing. So that's kind of the high-level overview of our expenditures and where the monies were left. Does anyone have any questions on that?
I do.
Yeah.
On the salary benefits, are any of those, were the savings there, was any of that planned, or was it all due to the pandemic?
That's a really good question. So you have to remember, this budget that we just closed out, this was created in the fall of 2019, before COVID ever was a thing. So we were anticipating a perfectly normal school year. These were would have normally done as part of that. And as COVID progressed, of course, we really weren't able to run our programming the way we wanted to.
And/or we couldn't hire staff because we couldn't get any applicants.
Right. Still fighting that.
Sometimes we had needs we couldn't meet, and we outsourced on some of those. And other times, we had the benefit of grants that came our way, and we tried to take advantage of those when they came. So one of the things you won't see is a lot of the COVID impacts. So there's programming we couldn't run, and then there were expenses we absolutely had that we didn't anticipate. But almost all of those expenses that we didn't anticipate, we were able to leverage the grants to pay for it through those resources. So otherwise, these numbers would have looked a lot different.
Right.
than they did.
And you probably remember, we did partner with Bill and the town last year to kind of piggyback onto their Gopher funds when they told us that we couldn't submit our FEMA claim because we didn't fit in that category of essential business, or I can't remember the exact language, but anyways, but that was, again, that was $65,000 we got through that program that we had originally booked against our general fund, and we were able to supplement using that grant fund, so it made our general fund expenditures look lower. We did the same with some salaries through the supplement public school grants. We were able to leverage those grants to fund these additional positions we needed for remote teachers and things that were unanticipated. So had we not had access to that federal funding, this would be a very different financial picture that you'd be looking at.
As a follow-up to that, have you had to go back and rehire those positions that you saved the money on last year of having added staff back?
I'll let Dr. Gibbons speak more to the staffing
Well,
piece.
the staffing looks very different this year because we're not offering remote. So as Janice said, we had to add teachers at almost all grade levels at the elementary school, and then we added, incrementally in various areas at the junior, senior high school. All of those we were able to charge to a grant, so they don't show up here. We don't have those positions in the current year budget because we're not offering remote. We intend to fill all the positions if we can get qualified applicants, but as everybody around us, is being impacted by this labor pool kind of crisis, we're seeing that too. So we have students on IEPs, and we have many paraprofessional and tutor positions. We've filled as many as we can. We're still advertising, but we still have them open. But we're required to provide the services nonetheless. So we're hoping that we're able to fill all the positions. We've struggled to fill food service, all the hourly employee positions we have struggled to fill. Right now, all of our professional staff have been able to, all my academic teachers, I filled all those positions. There's one guidance counselor that we haven't been able to find a qualified application, and then late in the summer, we received a resignation from the guidance counselor. So we're kind of trying to juggle things around to figure out how we're going to meet student needs if we don't have a qualified applicant. So it's a very fluid situation as far as that goes, and one of the things that we'll continue to do this year that we did last year is outsource. So that's what we're doing right now. We can't hire maintenance and custodials, so we're outsourcing. We couldn't hire all the food service folks, so we're outsourcing food service at the junior, senior high school, and we're keeping our employees at the elementary school because, the show still has to go on. So although we may not hire the position, we'll still hire through an outsource mechanism in order to meet our needs. So what that means is that when we look at financial statements, you might see, capacity in a salary line, but you'll see an over expenditure on the outsource line. So right now, we're still actively trying to fill those, but I'm pleased to report that all of our academic teaching positions have been filled.
Are you going to expect that your costs will be higher in general because of the outsourcing?
I don't think it'll be higher, no. The costs of benefits you can see is almost as high as the cost of the wage.
Yeah.
And when you outsource, the cost of things like retirement system, which hits us on the employer side really high in the public sector, is much lower for the private sector. So I don't think that we'll see big, I think we should come in, if not equal, maybe a little more favorably, just depends on how things play out. And right now, you see a lot of companies out there, that are offering huge bonuses just to get people to apply. And, so those outsourcing costs could also go up because they still have a similar labor issue that we do. They just have a bigger, larger capacity, and tentacles that go deeper in their fields to get people to fill their positions than we do. My teaching positions are filled. We have a better capacity to fill teaching positions than custodial because our network is more geared towards, educators.
So you mentioned, the discussion, and I was just looking at this, and maybe, this is something that's, for another discussion, but the benefit portion is about 44% of salaries, and compared to, an industrial environment, which is about 22%. It seems really kind of high, and I'm just trying to understand. I can see where it comes from. 14% is going to the retirement system, but 20% is going to health and dental, which is also a very high percentage. Again, if you have historical data on that, or maybe it's contractual related, it would just be interesting to understand, why you basically have overhead costs benefit overhead costs that are double industrial benefit overhead costs.
I'll let Janice speak to benefits in this state. I'm not as familiar with how.
So you're absolutely right. Some of our benefits levels are contractually obligated. We have a 3-year agreement with our teaching staff, and certain levels of benefit are guaranteed for that. This past year, our health insurance costs alone went up by just about 5%. Our dental didn't go up, but that is something that they assess every year. That it's a complicated
not certified, but not educational teacher, we're paying 14%. So that's a big chunk of change. So when you add all those things together, we also have certain benefits that are rolled into that amount that, gosh, I'm sorry, I think I'm echoing. I don't know what I'm doing here.
It's Tim.
Is it Tim? Okay. Sorry about that. That's kind of disconcerting. But we also have contractually agreed severance pays that are part of our teachers' agreement too. And of course, that varies depending on who's retiring or who's leaving us. So those are the big components of that number.
And just for anyone that doesn't know this, the retirement that is baked into our budget isn't something we decide, right? That's something that is decided at the state level, and then we have to absorb whatever those parameters are into our budget.
Mm-hmm.
And then for the health insurance, those are baked into collective bargaining agreements.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that on the health insurance, though I wasn't here at the time, that significant changes were made to the health plans at that time, which they acquired savings from, which offset the salary increases for that year when that contract was settled. So I do know that there has been some work in that area when contracts have come up for renegotiation recently.
Question. So, just on the benefits, so if the benefits are 40-something%, but the savings is almost equivalent to the salaries, so is there other benefit savings going on there besides just the reduction in salaries?
I'm not sure I understand your question. Say that again.
So the salary reduction is $508,000, but the benefit savings is $475,000. So that would suggest that maybe there's other benefit savings other than just the reduction in salary.
I think some of them, like, were, so coaches and stuff, we save on.
Right, some of the salaries don't get those kinds of benefits. So like coaches, for example, unless they're a teacher that's coaching, we wouldn't pay retirement on that salary or those types of things. So they're not entirely one for one, depends on, the role.
Okay, thank you.
But I think it's your question, why are the benefits so high? Is
No.
there something else besides retirement? Is that what you're asking?
No, I was just
Okay.
thinking that if only salaries were reduced by $508,000, if there's that much benefit savings, that maybe there was more going on there, and that there were other benefit savings.
Yeah,
But I understand.
yeah. Any,
One last question.
oh, sure,
if you don't mind.
sure.
Do you have a number on the savings for privatization? Do you know what that is? And then,
What do you mean
do you know
privatization?
how much you saved by going to privatization?
Last, I don't,
I wasn't here. Are you talking about for the health insurance?
no,
Oh.
no, when we can't hire the custodians,
Oh,
or we
oh,
couldn't
oh,
hire the
I'm
food
sorry, I
service.
wasn't familiar. We didn't, well, what I can tell you is we were able to leverage grants in this year to offset some of those costs. So I would have to boil that down a little bit differently for you. I'd have to look at it differently. For example, under one of our grant projects, we were able to get reimbursement for some of our custodial disinfecting services. Not a lot, because the grant didn't run the whole term of the year, but some. So it's not, I would have to calculate that part out. We also are looking at that same thing going forward this year. We may be able to leverage some of our grants available this year to offset some of our outsourcing. But we do continue to look for that. Later on in the report, I'll talk a little bit about a FEMA project that we were excited to find out we actually were eligible for, and we were able to recoup some costs that way. We're looking to track costs between June 30th and September 30th. When that project ends, we may be able to recoup some more. But it's a process with FEMA. So we never count those dollars until the check shows up. You're welcome. Any other questions on expenditures before we kind of go to the revenues?
You know what, though, you did do an analysis. I thought that there was a $60,000 savings when you all costed out.
Well,
If we had,
we hadn't presented those to this group, but I think we
Right.
did present to the board. Gary was,
did.
yeah.
164,000.
Yeah, if we fully outsourced or versus if we fully insourced, it was a savings of 160,000 with, certain assumptions, of course, but that, yeah, 11, I believe you're right, 11, yeah, 10.63, 10.63.
Is that primarily custodial?
Yep, custodial, and we looked at we looked at several different models. We looked at kind of a hybrid where we had some maintenance staff in addition to our custodial so that we could try and offset some of our professional services. We looked at what, four or five, yeah, different models of different ways, and it just depended on how you, how
You chose to outsource, what services you chose to outsource, but on the whole, the most expensive way, was to fully insource. That's what we found. So we do think that there may be some savings to the outsourcing. There are obviously, it's not just cost that you consider when you build your department, there's some intrinsic values of having your staff here and, having local staff, and we did weigh some of those factors as well.
You always want to have a certain number of staff in-house that are addressing the day-to-day needs as they arise. It's really hard to hold the contracted service accountable for something if the outcome is always changing. So one of the things that makes outsourcing custodial work appealing and cost-effective is that either the trash is empty or it isn't. Either the floor is clean or it isn't. And so looking at a hybrid model in which those services that you can attach to a concrete outcome and hold somebody accountable for are the ones that typically make the most sense to outsource. And then for those positions that require a certain customer service and agility, then those are the ones that you want to keep inside. So when you're doing repairs, you want somebody to know your buildings, Every day it's going to be something different. So outsourcing that for first echelon types of repairs, makes less sense, right, than it does to outsource something like custodial services that you can identify. So that's what Jan is saying. That we looked at different models to try to identify what makes the most sense now, because there's these gorgeous buildings that we have the benefit of now, and the worst thing we could do is not keep them maintained at a high level so that you get the maximum value out of the investment for the community.
Anything else on expenditures? No? All right, so the other side of that coin is the revenues, of course, the monies that come in. I've broken it down in this report in a format that's similar to the way, again, that you'll see it on our state reporting when they set tax rate and local revenue and federal. Local revenues overall, we had less by $240,000 than we expected. A huge component of that was food service sales, because we were operating under a USDA waiver where every meal to students was free, so therefore we weren't taking in the cash from students. So you'll see an offset increase kind of in the federal revenues because we took in more money under the federal food service than we did under local. The state revenues overall were a little bit higher than we expected. Our adequacy aid for fiscal year 21 actually dropped in the middle of the year by 11,000, but our special education aid increased by 82,000, so therefore we had a slight increase in the state revenues. And federal revenues were where we really, you've heard about them from us several times. That was where we really saw lots of different projects that were offered to us, different funding sources, most of them after we had already expended monies. So it was more of a submission of receipts to get reimbursement, which is a little different for us. Usually we approve a project and then we spend against the project. So that last year we had several of the Gopher funds that we worked on with the town. The CARES Act, a part of that was the supplemental public schools, and then we had an grant that we were able to use last year. We have 2 more tranches of ESSER that we have access to that we can spend through 2023, I believe. But we haven't, that's not included in this year's closing part. So the revenues were pretty straightforward. Any questions there on the revenues?
Yeah, I don't know if this is the appropriate time to talk about it, but I gather, what's the expectation for state revenues for the upcoming year?
Well, I can tell you, in
You wanna-
the adequacy,
Do you want to hold off for that until we get there?
well, it's actually on our coming, preview of coming attractions, kind of coming up at the back of my report for fiscal year
Okay,
'22.
when we get there, we'll talk about that.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
all right,
yeah, that's fine. And so, if no one has any questions on revenues, we'll get to the part that you all really, really care about. The only number anybody cares about, really, is the fund balance to reduce taxes. So, when we look at the fund balance, we talked earlier tonight about expenditures and revenues. That's generally what we look at throughout the year. As we get into the fund balance, that's actually derived from a different section of our financial statements, and it's basically our assets less the liabilities, and then what's left over. So what's left after you're done year. So it doesn't translate evenly between the expenditures we talked about because there are certain accounting adjustments and blending of funds. But in general, the same factors that you saw in the expenditures, where the money was left, that generally is the biggest piece of our money that goes back, the fund balance. So once again, in this section of the report, you'll see we highlight the same types of things that bring you down to this unexpended fund balance. The only difference really is we had some auditing adjustments added in to bring it up a little to the 1732. And then as we look at how we calculate based on the balance sheet information, get to the unassigned fund balance, there are some other things that we deduct. So you take basically your unexpended expenditures, you take your excess revenues, those things combine together, and then there are certain adjustments for blending. We take out the retained fund balance that we're allowed to withhold in our school district. I think it was 2014, the voters allowed the school board to vote to retain that as a contingency fund. There are a lot of strings attached to that contingency fund in order to be able to expend it. To my knowledge, Newmarket never has, but we retain it. So basically what we do at the end of the close of a year, we calculate whatever we held last year, the difference between what we would hold, and it's usually a small adjustment, and we basically just retain that. So after all of those things are factored in, we get down to an unassigned fund balance to reduce taxes. This agrees with what our audit shows. We've had our auditors in. So that's $1,538,201 that will be going back when we set tax rate. Yes.
Question. Fund balance retained 2.5%. That's not 454,000. Correct?
It's 2.5% of the net assessed value. So it's not of the budget. It's of the net assessed value that Department of Revenue. It has to do with our tax base. So it's DRA actually helps us calculate that part. It's not of the monies that you see. It's of the value set up by the net assessed value in town.
So could that number actually be higher than?
No, it's the net assessed value is set by DRA as part of the tax rate, and then we were able to take 2.5% of that to hold as a contingency. The town actually, I don't know, Bill, you're able to withhold up to 10%, right? Yeah, the town has different strictures than we do that they can withhold as a contingent. The state legislature recently, in September of last year, voted to increase that percentage to allow schools to withhold up to 5%. However, our warrant article that was voted in 2014 lists 2.5%, so that's the maximum we can withhold right now for contingency.
So with this $454,000, what does that give for retained balance overall?
That is the retained balance.
That's
it.
whole-
That's the whole shoot and match. Yep, exactly. The previous retained amount, we don't get to hang on to that past the end of the year. So basically, you take whatever you had set aside for your contingency, that goes back to the fund balance, and then you withhold your new amount based on the calculation.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Roger, did you have a question?
Yes, has the board stated
Are you talking about the excess adequacy or through this contingency plan?
Any of these, yeah,
Um, s-
unassigned.
Right, that has not come. I have one piece that I'll get to a little later. The state changed our adequacy formula in the middle of the year, which is gonna result in an additional almost $500,000 that we can't legally expend, because when DRA set our tax rate, they had a different number. So there is a vehicle, and I've explained a little bit later on in the report, and the school board was apprised of that. I know that we're gonna be coming back to them with some information about what a timeline would look like. It would involve another meeting with you folks to kind of walk through it, but there is a way to hold a special meeting to allow us to be able to retain that funding for a particular purpose, but it has to be done like a warrant. You know, we'd have to have people vote on it. So I know that we're having some discussions. We've prepared a timeline for the board. They haven't seen it yet. Actually, I haven't even had a chance to review it with Susan. We've been so busy, but it's a very abbreviated timeline. We have time to do it. We do have adequate time. I've run it by the attorney, but it's going to be a very quick-moving process because we have to get it completed before tax rate setting happens. And last year, that happened November 12th.
So, but that would only apply to the increase in adequacy.
Correct.
That's correct.
You can't take the money that was not expended under warrant Article 5 and ask for another warrant article on it.
We did. We asked for a $60,000 warrant article. So $60,000 of the balance was put into a revolving fund. But if the taxpayers didn't vote for it in March, if it wasn't voted, we can't
Okay,
do anything with this number.
all right, thank you.
Yep.
Just for a frame of reference, what was the unassigned fund balance at the end of last year's?
Oh, you're gonna quiz me on this. I
Uh,
think it was
and in
one.
fairness, it's probably better off going the year before because,
Yeah,
and I've
Okay.
harped on this at every meeting I've been to. This year and the previous year were so unique with COVID that
Sure.
the unexpended fund balances were much larger than
Sure.
they've ever been.
Yeah.
Yep,
So we don't want the general
That's what we
community
would
to think that
expect.
we're over,
absolutely.
you know,
Yep.
budget.
Right.
Yep.
But I do believe.
Last year was 1.1 million.
No, it was actually actually
No,
1,082,000. Yeah, something like
Million,
100.
Just shy of, just south
Yep.
of 1.1
Yep.
million.
But in a typical year, what would that look like?
I don't know.
I don't know because I don't know what typical
That
for new.
predated it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
predated everybody at the podium.
Right, I get it, I'm just trying to get
Yeah.
a frame of reference, a baseline to,
And just to set everybody's expectation, this year's not normal either. We
Yeah,
budgeted
right,
this
of course.
budget as if we were going to be done with COVID. Normal year, clearly we're not starting out that way. So I wouldn't be surprised if we're standing here next year at this time and we're talking about some anomalies as well.
And I think too, part of it is that never in my career have I ever seen the amount of money at the federal level become available for education. I've never seen it before.
Yeah.
I've been doing this for over 30 years.
Yeah.
And, what we've been trying to do is take advantage of every red penny that comes our way, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
We want to make sure that we're using our money last and other monies, before that. So, we anticipate, and Jen is going to go over some opportunities again next year.
Yep.
And so, though we'll probably have COVID-related expenses again this year, we're not going to tap the same dollar base, that was approved in the budget.
Right.
Because if we can take it from that kitty, we're going to take it from that kitty. So the idea is that eventually someday, it is our hope that
A
we're going
normal
to
year.
return to a normal,
Yep.
year, and, the expenses and the educational plan that we put forward is based on that, not based on these unusual circumstances. We're going to run, we're planning on running most all of our co-curricular programs, but there are still some that we won't. But we have a full complement of coaches for junior, senior high school, so we'll be offering for the fall, and if we can get coaches for the winter, we'll offer it all the way from the middle school on up, so we'll spend money that we normally would, but then there'll be other things that we can't spend money on. So, again, it's gonna be fluid this year, and to the extent that we can tap other sources, we will. And if next year you wind up getting, more of a fund balance than you otherwise would, I say the taxpayers benefit from that. So we'll do the best we can to navigate our future as tight to the dollar as we can.
Right. And we certainly, anytime we hear of any funding opportunity, we have thrown our hat in the ring this year. So to give you, kind of piggyback on what Susan said, it's been, to my understanding, it's been more than 10 years since Newmarket has been subject to something called a single audit. That happens when you take in more than $750,000 of federal funds in 1 year. We're subject to it for 21, 22. So we still have part of our audit to go. Our financials are done, but that will be another piece that's coming up. And that is kind of historic, I understand. So.
I apologize, I'm a little slow on this, but the special voting that you're talking about, okay, that is for expending funds for the 21-22 school year. Okay, you already have a budget for the 21-22 school year, and you're having potentially the special election to deal with money that you've already received or you think you might receive.
So for this, it would be, we would like to consider being able to use this unanticipated revenue.
Do you already have that unanticipated revenue? That's my question.
It comes in payments throughout the year from the state, so we have been guaranteed a higher level of funding from the state than was used to set the tax rate last year.
And you don't know what that is at this point?
I do. I don't have the exact numbers. I know that the difference is, I'm trying to find it on my,
Oh,
$485,000 roughly is the difference between what DRA used last year to set our tax rate and what we're actually going to get. So.
Okay.
If I misspeak correctly, but basically the adequacy is somewhat tied to how many people apply for free and reduced lunches.
Yeah.
And last year with free lunch, not a lot of people applied. The amount went down, and then the state decided to recalculate based on the previous year.
They let us use the prior year.
Let's use the
Yeah.
prior year, which
Yeah.
thus increased the number of people
Yeah.
we had free.
Yeah, but overall, and again, it's going to be a 1 year spike, right? That's 485,000. Don't expect that to be a continuing thing. That's a 1 year.
For
So you would-
okay.
Right. So
So-
you wouldn't want to use that to spin up new programming because the next year that money wouldn't be there. So.
Need people to apply for free and reduced lunch.
Yes, please, yeah, we'll use that as a plug. Please fill out those free and reduced lunch forms. Thank you.
Okay, so a couple other questions, I'm sorry. So for the upcoming year, the adequacy fund, we have any idea, is it gonna basically repeat next year what it did this year? That they're gonna suddenly say, oh, here's a bunch
Yeah,
more
that's a
federal
great,
money, whatever?
that's a great question, Joe. They set it for 2 years. So this 485 that I'm talking about, that's for the year that we're in right now, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
They have set next year. It's up, but it's up by less, and I'm like 300, yeah, 320, yeah.
And
Yeah.
will you have a warrant article in March to cover the?
We won't need to because we know the number. We'll be budgeting it, right? But
So
that was,
it'll be in
We
your
give you
budget
2
as opposed to
years.
needing to.
right.
It was
Okay.
an estimate for this year, then it was set. We didn't know what it was gonna be. Now we know what it is for this year.
And-
we
and
just
for
started,
next.
And next year. So it
Yeah.
won't be a question next year.
Right.
Okay.
We
gotcha.
only need the warrant article
For this year.
And what, we're considering are one-time projects that we weren't able to even consider, to be able to take advantage of that, where we're giving $1.5 million back to the town. And we still have some needs that we learned about as the year went on, after the budget was passed.
Yeah.
The board's gonna have a conversation in the next couple of weeks about, is this an opportunity, a one-time opportunity to get some of these things done? Because then we don't have to go back to the taxpayer because it's coming directly from the state. So we'd have to eventually, over time, build it into our requests to the town.
That's a good point. The board has two options. Have a special election for the funding board, automatically goes back to the tax.
Or do nothing and it goes back.
Right.
I got you.
So automatically out of the gate, you'd already have that amount left on your balance, no matter what happened next year.
That's not included in the 120.
Right, right, right.
And I'm sure you'll go over what it costs to run a special election.
Great point.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Any other questions on revenues or the COVID-related pieces that we just talked about? All right, so I'll give you a real brief update, not to bore you on the FEMA. We kind of talked about it a little bit earlier. Last year, at this time, we had compiled a whole bunch of expenditures. We actually submitted a claim to the state level. We were looking for reimbursement from the state because we had been told that schools were eligible for disinfecting costs, and then they changed the definition of what an eligible entity was. They carved schools out, and again, I believe they said we weren't essential places of business or something equally pejorative. So we weren't able to submit, even though we'd aggregated all of that. We ran over and worked with Bill at the 11th hour on a Friday afternoon to piggyback on Gopher funds. We were able to recoup some of those monies through Gopher funds on a different project, but we did leave money that we couldn't submit for. Then in January this year, they decided that schools now are eligible, but we lost that earlier time frame. So it started January 21st, and we're able to go through 9/30. That's our new window. So we put through a claim. We worked with we were able to put through a $65,000 claim from January through June. And again, these are very specific things: disinfecting, sanitation equipment, plexiglass shields that we had. They're very specific things that we were able to put it through for. We do think we're going to have some more expenditures between June and September. We will probably put through another claim on that. As far as I understand it, the claim has made it through 2 levels of the state, came back to us, it's now back at the state, and then it has to go to the federal for the project closeout. So as I said before, when the check arrives, we consider it income because it takes a little bit of approval, and at any point it can change. So we don't count our chickens before they're hatched. So that's kind of one of our projects. As I mentioned before, we have 2 other ESSER grants that we are looking at figuring out how best to leverage that grant funding. That's going to be part of our discussion as we go through this year. And so that's kind of what we know of right now. That doesn't mean there won't be other things that come our way or that we would look at applying for, but those are the knowns that we have right now of what's on the horizon. Okay. Any questions on that? And then the revised adequacy aid, we've kind of talked a little bit about that. You can apply, the $485,000 is, well, we have already kind of explained that. We can apply it to lower the tax rate if we do nothing, or we can access it through RSA 197:3. And I've attached a copy of that RSA for you to the back of the report. And a special meeting, there's a special timeline, and as I said, there's more to come on that. We do need to get back with the board and kind of walk through that timeline and see what we can do.
If the board decides to go the way of a special meeting, when would that special meeting have to be held?
Based on the timeline that I calculated, we would have to have that before tax rate setting, which is generally in November.
In mid-November.
Right, so everything backs up from there because then you have your posting requirements. You have to post 14 days before, and then 7 days before that, you have to have your public hearing. And so it kind of backs up from that end date.
You don't have a lot of,
We
you
do.
gotta make a decision.
We do not have a lot of road, no. So I'm imagining that's going to be kind of foremost on our agenda at the next meeting.
Would we need to go through the budget committee?
We will.
may have to have an emergency
Yep,
meeting.
we will. That's actually a requirement. We would once the board, if the board decides to go in that direction, we do need to reconvene with you folks. It's an advisory type of thing. You don't have to vote or anything, but we do have to consult with the budget, the process, and what we're thinking of doing. That is part of the statute.
And you have a meeting scheduled for the 27th, so that will flow nicely with what the process would look like if we
Yep.
choose to do that.
Yep.
So it would be, we're going to present the timeline information to the board
That-
this week, and then if they say, yeah, this is what we're gonna do, then Jen and I will look through all of our needs that did not get funded for projects and make a recommendation to the board to consider how we might be able to use that.
So that's potential for our agenda on the
27,
27th
yes,
Yep.
of September.
yes.
Yeah, yep, yep. So any questions on that adequacy aid piece? We've kind of talked, pretty well beaten that up, haven't we? All right. And then the final thing that I mentioned was just what I alluded to before. Our auditors have recommended that we think about a warrant article to put on in March that allows us to increase the percentage that you can retain from 2.5%, which was the previous legislated amount, to 5%. Doesn't mean that you have to retain that, doesn't mean that you're going to use that. It's just that's the new statute amount that went along with the old warrant article. We never could use, we have a contingency fund north of 2.5%, but now the statute allows for that. So they just suggested that we align it with the statute. And so that's kind of my report, other than, we have embedded some notes on specific variances. If you look behind the expenditures category, I tried to list out some of the amounts and what those variants meant and how they came to be. And then finally, you can see the expenditures by function code. Again, it looks a little different, but the bottom line numbers are the same as displayed. It's just looking at the pie a different way. And I think that's all we have for you tonight. If you have any other questions on that or anything we can share.
I have a question on the upcoming budget. So the state has authorized vouchers for people if they want to take their kids and send them to private schools or whatever. Have you seen any impact on student enrollment at this point?
We will be looking, October 1 is when the official enrollment numbers are calculated for the year. Based on what I'm seeing, just boots on the ground, I don't think we're losing numbers, we're gaining numbers. We've had a lot of people in the last week and the last several weeks, come in and register their students. So I don't think we're going to run the risk of a huge outflow of students based on what I'm seeing, but you don't know because, of course, that wasn't in place at the time. In time for this school year, really. So we'll have to wait and see what the impacts of that are. But yeah, we're not losing students. We're gaining students. In fact, we had to add an additional kindergarten teacher. We shifted teachers around because we had so many incoming kindergartners.
That's in the elementary side. What about like in the junior
We're
high?
seeing, the junior, senior high school, we're seeing, an influx as well there.
Okay. Good. I don't know whether that's good or bad, but it's,
It is.
the voucher thing kind of like,
Some
wow,
might leave,
that's,
which is normal.
Yeah.
It's always normal, when you get to the 8th grade. At each level of transition, sometimes kids will go to a private preschool, and then they'll show up in kindergarten. And, when kids go off from elementary school up to middle school, sometimes you'll see transition there where parents will opt for a parochial school program or some other form of a private school education. And then when they get to the high school, it's the same thing. There's other options and opportunities. I know my nephew was a big skier, and so he didn't go to high school locally. He went up to a place where he could go to high school with skiers and be on a ski team. So, as the kids get older, sometimes they look for different options, for education. But then you have other people that are moving in. Right now, I would argue that in Newmarket, it's really hard to hold on to any property here. Where people are moving in, I think which is not unusual when you upgrade your facilities, that, oftentimes you will see an influx of people moving into the community because they believe that the community really invests in education and their children. And Newmarket's a wonderful community that offers so much to the residents here that I think, it's a very attractive place. And, we're doing a lot in our school district to provide a varied and, high-quality learning experience for kids. And I think that's attractive to many families.
okay, so the bottom line is you really at this point, haven't seen any decline in.
Quite the opposite, at least this month leading up to the opening of school.
Okay, good. I guess that's good. Any other questions?
All right, well, thank you, folks, for having us tonight, and don't hesitate to let us know if you do have questions.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Good job, guys.
Appreciate your support.
Thank you.
Next, we have Bill on the town side. Okay.
So I apologize, but, so I saw Roger's, so I kind of took that for writing my notes for you tonight, thinking that might be helpful. But it was not a 13-page document, so, I guess what, maybe the best thing to do would be to start off with hitting the highlights of the, actually what I would consider to be material points, meaning, and I'm using the International Accounting Standard Board's rule around that in terms of material. So for expenditures, focusing on the general fund first, one of the bigger things was a 9% under expenditure due to personnel changes and positions going unfilled. And this is going to come up again as they go through this. Buildings and grounds, 21% under due to the facility director role being unfilled for much of the year. And then in additionally, electricity expenditures that were lower, and then decreased overtime in that department as well. The next was police, which was 10% under, and that was due again largely to personnel changes and positions going unfilled during the year. So specifically, that's part-time, full-time, and overtime were all under budget. And those really constitute the majority, or a good majority, in terms of singular line items that that make up much of the under expenditures in the general fund. Then, if we're focusing on, just for a few minutes here, on the enterprise and special revenue funds, the rec department was 50% under expended, and that was, as you can imagine, due to the pandemic, just because of programs that didn't happen or were dramatically curtailed and or delayed. Then solid waste was okay. Here's a highlight: and over budget in their expense line due to an increase in recycling to the tune of $91,000, and then solid waste $61,000 plus. And essentially, it was because people were staying home, and they did projects and other things, and produced more waste than normal, according to the Director of Public Works. And then water, they were 7% under expended, and wastewater 5% under. So they're not big percentage numbers, but because of the size of water and wastewater, it ends up being a fairly large number.
So, do I read this correctly, that there's 897,000 unexpended, but you have 208,000 still encumbered, that obligations or whatever you want to call it?
That is correct.
Is that correct?
It is correct.
So,
Yep.
So the ninth is, are we returning roughly $700,000 to the general fund?
That doesn't necessarily mean that.
Okay.
No, sometimes that rolls over, or it gets blanked out because it's, and then it does go back, not to the general fund, but it does go back. The issue really here is we're, unlike the school district, and we have the same auditor that they have, we have a brand-new auditor this year because of the way our, I can't remember what you call it, but this town requires that you, every 6 years, you have to, or every 3 years, you have to go to bid for a new auditor. Every 6 years, you have to replace your auditor. So we hit that point, we replace our auditor, and it's Plodzik and Sanderson. So they could only fit us in after the school, but not immediately thereafter. So they're still finishing our audit. They've been here and spent time, was it last week?
But,
on,
I mean, unless there's
or the
some
week
kind of
before.
big screw up,
Well, we're hoping, no, of course not. I'm not anticipating any big screw-ups. But
do,
anyway, yes.
do we have a significant
Fund
amount
balance?
that's gonna be returned at the
It's
end of the year?
looking that way. It is, yeah. But I'm hesitating.
I don't,
want-
okay,
I
I don't
want
blame you,
those
but I just wanted to
audited
make sure that
financials.
I'm kind of like, okay, I'm reading this right. Based, if
Yeah.
this was the final audit and everything was hunky-dory, we would have, I don't know, $700,000 that would be
Correct.
being returned on top of what the school returns.
That is correct, yes.
Which I would hope would have some kind of impact on our tax rate next year, but.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it was an unusual year.
Yes, I
In
agree.
many respects. If you had asked me a year ago, I would never have expected this, because we were all so, and it has everything to do with what the federal government did to open their wallets.
Mhm.
Had it not been for that, and I'll talk about that in just a minute, we probably would have been right on the edge. And in fact, interestingly, as we were approaching the end of the year, I'd put out a memo to the department heads saying, slow down, just to be on the cautious side, because we weren't exactly sure where we were going to end up. So, much better than I was anticipating, depending on how you look at it. I mean, you could look at this like, wow, you really, padded your budget. But that wasn't the case.
No, I think,
Like I said, some departures that were unanticipated,
Mhm.
and then we had some difficulty filling positions. Like in the case of the facility director, it was a joint position with the school district. And we had somebody really good, and then they left. And it took a while to find the person in the first place. So,
can you speak a little louder, just to?
sorry,
So that $689,000 surplus, does that just go back to the taxpayer? What's the process?
Well, so it's similar to the conversation we were having earlier. There's money that you can retain,
Yep.
and then there's money that can go back to the taxpayer. Our charter, or policy, I think it puts us between 5 and whatever percent is advised. You can't go below, I believe, 5% in retainage. And the reason for that is to, in the event that all hell breaks loose, you have money in the bank in order to make sure that you can cover your expenses. So fortunately, and I mean, I think, your discussion about who's coming here to attend school touched on that this Newmarket star is on, so to speak. And so it makes the probability of us having financial problems in the future less likely. But, who knows? So,
Bill, question?
yes.
Do you happen to know what the current general fund balance is for the town?
Okay, so I was looking at the balance sheet before I came down, and it was, I think it was 2.9 million, somewhere around there. Yeah.
Okay, is there a parameter that you have for what you'd like to have in the general fund? For example, do you want to be able to
You mean
run
for
the town
retain?
for 2 months, 3 months, should something happen?
So DRA has a higher percentage recommended for holding back money. I think they're closer to 10%. Don't quote me on that, even though I'm on television. But they have a range of percentages that they recommend. And we've been on the low end for quite a few years. So honestly, I'd like to see us have more, just to be on the safe side. Now, that's just because I tend to be a very cautious person by nature. But I also spent a good portion of my career working with failing businesses, and so doing turnaround management. And so you just you see people screw up their businesses, and you're working them to wind down or restructure and get things back on track. You wish that they had had more cash on hand. So that's.
Thank you, Bill.
The general fund reserve balance that was given to us at CIP meeting is 1.5 million.
1.5 million?
Yeah.
I can't answer that. I'm not going to dispute that, but
Okay.
she may have been talking about, actually I'm not sure what she was talking about for that fund balance. I think that she was talking about a specific fund balance for one of the funds. And I was speaking specifically to the general fund. So if I'm wrong, I'll correct that. But like I said, just before I came down, I pulled the period 13 fund balance sheet for the town, just to have a quick look at it.
But it's almost free with the enterprise funds.
Yes. I didn't bring them together, though.
Mm-hmm.
To be honest, I was thinking about what I have to report on in the MS 535, and I was thinking about the 434, which what our anticipated revenues are for the year. So I was thinking about those things in addition to what we were going to talk about. Would you like me to talk about revenues?
Yeah, any questions on expenses?
The legal was up by 35,000. Was there something unusual about that?
Yeah, it was an unusual year in that respect as well, and I think there were just some. I'm trying to think of how to put it. We just had some.
There were some personnel issues.
Personnel issues that became legal matters, and that's pretty much, I think, all I should say. And that was unanticipated. So.
And secondly, looking forward, anticipating that for the coming budget cycle, that you'll have significantly higher costs for recycling?
That's a good question. I don't really have an answer for you. That's something that I want to work with Rick Molaski, and we haven't had we won't be meeting until next week or the week after to go over their budgets. So, sorry.
Yeah, you want to move on to the revenues?
Sure. Okay, so again, short and sweet, focusing on general fund and the highlights. Relative to tax revenue overall, we're largely on target, as you can see. License permits and fees, we were 6% over in terms of collection, and that was mainly due to motor vehicle registrations, which I can remember at the time talking with the town clerk tax collector and just kind of puzzling over, wow, why, what's going on? Because again, we were anticipating things to be different in the negative, and they weren't. As in terms of state-sourced funds, we were 13%, and that was there were more meals and rooms tax to about 54,000, and municipal aid than we were anticipating. And then charges for services, those were 16% under. That's the kind of the downside. And again, I think this was probably pandemic related. Interestingly, this was largely due to ambulance receipts being under what was budgeted. So I thought that was weird too. Probably Rick Molaski will smack me tomorrow or something because he'll say, no, you got that wrong. It's the number's right, but the reason's not that. So, and then in terms of the enterprise funds and special revenue area, the rec was 17% under by about 69,000. Again, pandemic-related lost programs such as the summer camp and other programs. They happened, but it happened in lower numbers, much lower numbers. Solid waste, 38% over budget. Same reason as noted in the expenditures section. Water was 18% up, and wastewater was 13%. I apologize, I did not get a chance, and we had talked about it, and I completely forgot what his excellent explanation was to me about why that was, in terms of water and sewer being up the way they were, but I cannot for the life of me remember right now, and I didn't get a chance to catch him before the end of the day.
Well, it kind of makes sense. More people are home, right? So they're using more water and more waste, and so
Yes,
the rates are set,
exactly.
and the revenues go up higher than what you expected. The usage was higher.
Right. Yep. And we had a bit of a drought, and that
But on the same
causes
token, the expenses
additional
were
water
higher too.
usage. And we, and I know that some of you had the chance to meet with him on a Saturday and ask questions as well, so that you probably got more than you'll ever get from me on that topic. So, yeah, he knows what he's doing. Okay. If you want, I can move on to the part where you were asking about COVID.
Yeah, one question on solid waste.
Yes.
You stated that solid waste was up because there was more waste and the cost of recycling was up.
Correct.
But on the revenues, the solid waste revenues were up also.
That's correct.
Was that, and that due to, was that because there were more bags sold or more construction waste? Or
Construction waste is
construction?
my understanding. Bags sold the revenue was good there as well, but my understanding is there was more construction waste than typical. And that was largely because of the pandemic. Okay.
I don't want to put you on the spot for something that we haven't officially asked you for.
Sure.
The COVID related. So, I mean, if you're willing to talk about something.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Hmm?
I appreciate that.
Okay.
No, this is, I mean, I thought it was a decent question, and I wanted to at least give you a sense of what's happened in terms of government-specific funding that we were provided as a community as a result of the pandemic. So I'm not going to go into, huge detail, but a good sense of what we've been doing. So the one thing that we've got which impacted expenses was the Secretary of State provided funding for voted-related activities, and so that money went directly to the town clerk, tax collector area, and that, when I say Secretary of State, I mean New Hampshire Secretary of State provided the funds. Ultimately, I'm sure they came from the federal government, but the idea was to help to cover or at least mitigate the cost of disease spread protection, right? So they put up plastic barriers and whatever, cleaning and all the rest. The second thing was the gopher funding, which was the governor's money that was, again, derived originally from the federal government, but each community was given a certain portion. Our portion was $223,083. And again, it was to mitigate pandemic-related costs like protective gear, technologies to enable virtual working and meetings, so we could have you guys meet virtually, and we did some other things such as we had laptops for people so they could work from home, so if they were afraid to come in, frankly, or if it just didn't make any sense for them to be here. And then we also improved our firewall infrastructure, which included the virtual private networking feature. So then we added to the licenses, and we were able to have that work without us being interrupted constantly by droppage. And then, as you heard earlier, 65K of that went to the school because they had run out of funding. Then the other portion was FEMA, and the FEMA money and the Gopher money were intended to work in tandem. So the Gopher, when it came to PPE expenditures and, PPE expenditures largely, then the idea was that they would cover 25% and FEMA would cover the other 75%. FEMA also was paying for overtime labor and benefits related to that overtime labor. So, and again, this was specific to first responders. So really that meant fire, anyone who was working, fire and rescue, and then the police department. So the minor difference between when you were listening to the school explain what they were able to do, for example, in the classrooms, they put up plexiglass barriers in between, on desk or whatever. They also did that for voting. But when we put plexiglass up in the tax office in order to provide a protective barrier, that was rejected by FEMA because they weren't considered essential or first responder personnel. So, which I went nuts over and called one of our senators and said, this is absurd. But anyway, shortly thereafter, FEMA then changed the policy so that instead of paying 75%, they started paying 100% of everything. So that was, I'm not sure that was a good thing or a bad thing, but an interesting outcome of that is it added to the funds that we were supposed to get in that process. And that is something that has come up in the audit is, gee, you got more funds than you spent because 25 many of these expenditures had already been covered. And then all of a sudden, we got 25 more than we were supposed to from FEMA. It's not 100% accurate to say that because we haven't finished compiling all the numbers. We've done almost everything and submitted everything with the exception of the last one, and that's due on September 30th. So we'll see how that turns out. And we've been submitting all along. So far, I think we've received about 31,000 from FEMA, and we've got additional funding that we're going to be submitting for, and one's about between 5,000 and 6,000 that we're waiting to hear back from. So it's not huge money, but it did help for sure. There's no question. And then the last piece is that there's the ARPA, the American Relief, whatever it was, or Recovery Program Act. That also was giving monies to every community. And so Newmarket was a recipient of that. They gave out half this year, and then they're going to give out the other half of it next year, same time, somewhere in June, July. We received 497,000 of that, So that's the first installment. The interesting thing about that, though, is we won't really, we've been trying to figure out how to use this because it's very restricted. So, you can use it, again, in the way we were dealing with spending gopher money and FEMA money. And now, really, the only thing that we believe, and this may change if we get additional information, but it's water projects that we'll be looking to use those funds for, and technology that supports water improvements for the community. So there are other things you can use it for, like, housing, affordable housing, or you can do, improving broadband capability and access. But we don't have that as a problem really in this community. So that doesn't make sense for us necessarily. So if somebody seeing this calls in and says, of course there's a problem, you're not paying attention to something, well, I'm all ears and we're all ears. But ultimately it is the council that would make that decision.
I assume you can't use it to retire debt for
You
older
cannot,
water projects?
absolutely not.
Okay.
Yes,
It's
and
a
it
water
says very
project,
clearly, you cannot do that.
For-
And and they don't want you using it to reduce your tax burden either,
No,
except for those specific things, right? But that's
we had water projects in the past that we're still bonded for, right?
well, we're doing it right now. I mean, we have, millions of dollars we're in the process of spending, and, $500,000, it's nice, but it's not gonna cover, the water projects that we're funding right now. So,
Yeah,
but it's good.
I was thinking the Callan Dam, I don't know if you could somehow. use
Well,
it to
it'd be
retire.
nice if you could retire that debt, but they're not gonna let you do that.
Okay.
So, sorry.
Worth a shot.
Believe me, I thought about
It's
it.
water related.
So, yeah, yes. They're thinking more like water that's, you're gonna drink,
Yeah,
so.
Where do those revenues show up on your sheets?
They don't. They show up it's a grant. This is grant funding. So they're not showing up this is not money that you guys budgeted. And in fact, this doesn't really, affect you in terms of being a budget committee, because these are monies that are, outside of that for the most part. They're tracked differently, so. Particularly the SARP money, because it's gonna be used on, outside of the general fund area.
But
Unless
it-
something changes and we have new and interesting information and the council and the town manager and decide that we
In the
can do
past, you've
otherwise.
given us information on grants, right?
Yeah, that was my mistake.
Yeah,
Because those I should never have done that, to be honest, because it was that you're not,
Well,
that stuff carries over in some cases multi-years. And so I thought that was something that I was supposed to give out and did at one point, and I went, oh my gosh, I probably shouldn't have sent that out, because it just
Again,
adds to
not to put you on the
confusion.
spot, did the town manager say don't do that, or?
No, I'm the one who recognized and said, hey, I think I sent them a report they didn't need, so.
It's income to the town and it's expenditures by the town. I think the budget committee should be aware.
It's not something we normally get, and it has nothing to do with budgets, generally speaking.
Excuse me.
Yep.
If the town has revenues from grants,
Mhm.
to do projects that otherwise would be funded out of tax revenues, it seems to me that it is very relevant, and I believe the statute allows the budget committee to have access to the financial information of the town.
You could be right. I'm the one who kind of broke tradition by accident and probably shouldn't have done that. In reality, what the grants aren't it's not like we're, for example, when you're using a bond, you're borrowing that money from whomever, usually going through the bond bank in our case. And then you're having to pay that back. Or if we're receiving funding from the federal government that's not in the form of a grant, and we're paying that back, and they're doing it because we can get a better interest rate than we would on the open market, then that's another thing that would have an impact on the budgeting. And so because you're having to budget for the principal and interest payments. But with grants, you're not. And some of them are grants that don't do much and have very little activity over a long period of time. So
Theoretically, I'm sorry.
I'm hoping I don't get fired at the end of this. When Steve watches this later and says,
In invoking materiality, $500,000 is material to this town.
I'm not disagreeing with you.
And when we did the splash pad, we did it both out of taxpayer funded and grants. And it wouldn't have happened without the grants, but it wouldn't
true.
have happened without the taxpayer money. So the
Correct.
grants and taxpayer money are intimately intertwined.
I don't want to put Bill on the spot here,
No,
guys.
no, but as a member of the budget committee, I would ask that we.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think we need to talk amongst ourselves and
Okay.
bring this up to the town manager.
I'm definitely the wrong guy to make that decision. and I think I stepped in it. And my apologies to my boss, the council.
Do you have a
No, I think we beat the horse to death here. All good.
So that's all I have.
Okay, and any other questions for Bill? Yeah? All right.
Very good.
Thank you,
Thanks.
sir, appreciate it. Okay. Next on our agenda is the approval of minutes from June 28th. Everybody had a chance to take a look at them? Any questions, comments? No? Okay. Second? And Brian Hickey. All those in favor of,
I wasn't there, so.
one abstain, okay, so. Eric, did we hear you? You in favor?
Yes?
Are you on mute?
Yeah. He said yes. He said yes. He said yes.
Okay, review plan schedule. At this point, I have from Steve or whatever. I'm expecting probably in October that we will have some more information on when the the sessions will be, whatever. But at this point, I have nothing. Okay. Any other business? One of the things was Roger wanted to bring up something. Questions?
Yeah, I distributed earlier today by email. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, you don't want to discuss it now, we can wait for another, till our next meeting, up to the committee position.
So, in essence, Roger has asked that when the town gives us their budget or their financial information, basically he's kind of asking that they also produce in writing documents, or kind of like what the school did, that talks about the reasons for the variances, right? Is that kind of like in a nutshell?
Yeah, I find that Janet's memorandum was very clear about, where they underexpended, where they overexpended, what happened, where the COVID monies come and go, the impacts, and I thought similar things from the town would certainly help us understand I was just basically thinking that I'd love to see a report like this from the town that, that helps us understand where are the major things. There are a lot of numbers on these sheets, and they're very small print.
For item 2, do you want to include grants in that?
That's a separate issue.
Yeah, no, I echo what, Roger's talking about in terms of even an executive summary that would at least give us some dialogue that goes with the numbers. I find most of the time I'm just sitting here trying to look for variances and doing it myself without having any idea what the background is, but at least, you can get someplace, but it would be nice if you were led there. And the other thing I was gonna ask you is, you were talking about the grant detail, and maybe, we take that as a task to take back to the council, that we be provided that. I don't see any reason why we shouldn't be provided with it, it's money.
That was my next conversation.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree. It's it's money into the town, money that the town is expending, that the budget committee should be aware,
Yeah,
and have an explanation.
if the grant money can have any impact at all on the regular budget, if we could use a dime of it for anything, then we should know everything about it,
Okay, but generally, a grant is for a specific thing, here's a grant to, improve cable access or whatever, here's a grant or whatever.
But with all the COVID money, you think that some of that money would offset some of our normal expenses somewhere, you would think?
Well, you said it did, right?
Yeah, even so, you've got.
We had the Gopher funding that we covered, we got
Yeah.
apparently 125% or something of FEMA, I'm
Yeah,
not sure what that
yeah,
ended
so-
up being.
Right, it's just a lot of money there that we would not see it and know about it, so it just
Right.
seems like it should be
And-
visible.
And if the town received money for, additional costs of, first responders via a grant, it seems to me that is paying for something that otherwise we would have to pay for in taxes. And it may in fact be paying for people that were on the budget for by taxes, but that are not paid by taxes, they're paid by the grant. So it seems to me that we need transparency.
It's
I
hard to
don't,
imagine that it would be so separate that none of this grant money would influence our budget.
and I don't understand, what the reluctance would be to not share that information. He's gotta share it with the town council, it's open to everybody anyway, I'm sure. So,
Well, it can't be budgeted because you don't know you're gonna get it until.
No, but
But in retro, you could certainly provide the detail of what you got and what it was for.
Well, I heard that
Yeah.
there was money we've already been awarded that we're gonna get
Sure.
half of next year that we already know we're gonna get.
yeah,
So that actually could be something that would affect the budget.
Yeah.
Well, more so is that if you're hiring, for example, you're hiring more people who are EMTs, things like that, in order to fulfill a grant, eventually the grant runs out. Are you going to let the EMT go, or you now have to plug it into part of the budget? So,
Right.
we had that, I'll just reflect back on Derry, we had the exact same problem, in hiring like 8 police officers, a 2-year grant. Well, the town council was very concerned about funding the 8 police officers when the grant ran out. So, absolutely.
good, very good point.
So-
I'm sorry, just back to Roger's letter. I think it's a great idea. We don't make it a bigger amount of work than it needs to be. I think an executive summary of variances is perfect, like Jan has done. We still want to overburden.
I didn't intend it to be
No, I
anything
know you
more than,
didn't, but I would hate for it to grow, so
than
as long as we're just
than a
very
summary,
clear that.
executive summary sort of thing, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I think all we're asking is that you put something in writing that kind of summarizes
Few
it.
paragraphs.
May I make a suggestion? Roger, would you like to take a cut at a note to Steve about an executive summary, however you want to word it, what we would like to see when we accompany the actual expense and revenues? I will take a cut at the grant issue. And if it's okay with everybody, at our next meeting, we'll kind of look at that review that letter and everybody approve it, and we'll send it off to Steve then.
Okay, so we'll review that meeting, that letter.
Yeah, we'll review the,
two
yeah, I
topics next-
suspect that there'll probably be, between me and you, a couple of, and maybe to everybody else, we'll send it around and make sure everybody's kind of like, in favor of it or approves it before we actually meet on it next September. Next September, we will, actually vote on it and then send it off to Steve. You okay with that, Eric?
Joe,
Yep.
in regard to emailing out to the members, I don't think we should be doing that.
Okay.
Because then it becomes part of a record, and emails amongst this group,
Okay.
you know.
What I will do, Roger and I will probably do something,
Yeah.
and then when we have what I think is kind of like a final version, I'll say, here, guys, here's what it is that we're gonna talk about.
Yeah.
We'll get it with
You
the other
gotta be
documents.
careful even between two of you.
As long as, we can do it.
I think it becomes more of a situation if there's a quorum,
Yeah.
you know, if you have.
Like it, okay.
But I think we should try as much as possible to avoid the email exchange. I mean, I think you should continue to send your agenda and everything through email, because it's critical that we get that before the meeting. But any other discussions off the agenda should probably wait till the meeting.
Okay.
We have had a right to know meeting with Steve this year, haven't we? For how many new members we have?
Yeah, we had a bunch of, we have had the right to know speech.
Last year.
And
We have this year.
we didn't have it this year with Steve.
Maybe if you'll do it the next meeting.
Yeah, he used to attend these, but I think he's got a lot of things on his plate or something.
Yeah, no, I get it, but even if you wanted to have Bill, I'm sure Bill's fully versed in the right to know law.
Okay. All right. Next meeting.
Yeah, we're having the budget season, so it's not the best time.
In Massachusetts, there's a little seminar, you have to do it online, you know, if you're a finance committee member, yeah. So I've done it, you know, back then, so.
Just
There's
quick,
one other business, Mike Matossi.
sorry, just quickly, are you guys planning to send this to town council meeting this Wednesday, next Wednesday, or in September?
I'm sorry, what?
This proposed bill for the executive summary and the grant thing, is this something you're thinking to bring to the town council in September, or like in the next two meetings this month? Well, next month is September, yes.
Next month, we will, as a group, approve the letter that
Okay.
I will then forward to Steve.
All right,
That's not till 27th.
okay. Yeah, that was my question, yeah.
Another item, Mike Matozzi is resigned. If anybody, we have an opening on the budget committee. I'm inclined not to fill it at this point, but if anybody knows anybody that wants to join the budget committee, Mike Matozzi.
I think we should accept his resignation too as a board.
Oh, okay. Right. So we received a resignation from Mike Matozzi. I guess we probably should do a vote on that, whether we accept his resignation. Anybody in favor?
Okay.
So you made the motion.
Second.
And
We have a motion and a second.
okay, Gary motion. All those in favor? Accepting the resignation?
Aye.
Aye.
Yes. Okay. Motion. Mike, who seconded?
I second Gary, yes.
Any other business?
I just have one quick question for basically the board. We're meeting at 7 o'clock. Is it possible that we could meet as early as 6, or does that interfere with some people's work, or, you know, I mean, I'd prefer to start a little bit earlier so that, you know, as we get into the budget season, we're not here until 9:30. Just a thought.
Would
Yeah.
would 6:30 be better, or? a little bit-
6:30, I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, like,
I'm fine with 6.
I can do 6:30, I can't do 6.
Okay. Six thirty sounds good.
6:30?
Yeah.
All right.
So
Are we
if we
saying
can set them
6:30?
up for 6:30.
Yeah.
All right. We can set them up for any time we want. so.
Well, I mean, we wanna obviously make sure everyone can attend. Eric?
I can do 6:30, no problem.
Okay, you can do 6:30 also.
6:30.
6:30 works. Thank you.
Any other? All right, that being the case, I'll
Motion
entertain a
to
motion
adjourn?
to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, see you guys.
Thanks, everyone.